Good morning. I love being introduced as standing between the room and lunch. So yes, I am from California. I have lived and worked in Silicon Valley for, let's just say, a long time. And a lot of the work that I do is really bringing the digital and social realm into companies in very productive and meaningful ways. Companies and organizations spend a lot of time, talent, and treasure on bringing these capabilities to companies. But what I find is that leadership is really not brought into the process very well. As change leaders, they are often talking the talk, as it were, inviting the workforce to adopt, engage, and to work more collaboratively. And they may have heard the great principles of digital leadership, things like hierarchy, personal knowledge management, network leadership. But I find one of the most crucial aspects is that they do not have the sense of how. How do I do that? How do I become more of a digital leader as I'm advising my company to become transformed digitally? And so I want to spend just a few minutes being very specific about how that can happen. And these are all actual pieces of work that I've been engaged in, or a case study that I'm very knowledgeable about. So I've just given the brief time, I've picked 4 areas that I want to talk about today and share with you and hopefully have a conversation about. Quite often, leaders who are organizational leaders, let's say, do not understand how to master digital fluencies themselves. We've talked about email overload. They also do not understand that they have a crucial and vital role to play in empowering networked and social structures. And I'll show a few examples of that. And they rely on often outdated models of communication to their teams, to their company. So I'm going to talk about how some leaders have used these capabilities to invite more participative communications. And they have to model digital leadership not only to the entire workforce, but to the teams that they directly manage. And often they don't understand as well that the principles of network social structures, the kind of network that we live in, is often embodied in the tools that they have. So as they use the tools, as they practice the practice of thinking about communicating in a different way, they are supported by these sort of floating concepts. Oh, you can't even see them. Well, let me just read them off. Transparency, collective, persistent, emergent, independent, and participative. These are all elements and qualities of the tools that they have that they may not really understand have an impact when they use them. So I'm going to talk quickly about techniques for digital leadership with respect to a digital home for an organization, peer leader co-working, and connector and influencer habits of practice. No, this is not a portal. It is absolutely the antithesis of a portal. This is a digital home that creates a sustained, shared experience for say a management team, a leader, and all of the people in their organization. One of the things that I noticed last year when I was engaged with a company was that they invested an incredible amount of good energy into bringing a global team of corporate communications people together for a 2-day face-to-face hackathon. Lots of great energy, lots of good ideas, and even some projects that had some momentum going forward. After the event was over, all of that sort of vaporized. When you have a sense of a digital home, you use the tools to sustain that momentum, create memory about that experience, invite people to continue their ideas and conversation around it. You also don't send around anymore too long didn't read emails about things like welcoming new employees and having everybody do reply all, welcome, Joe. So this becomes a living and breathing space. It's consistently fresh because everybody in the organization is eager to see what's going on. There's social conversation embedded. Leaders can actually then do their own digital listening and seeing how people are responding to material, or if there's questions that need further sort of action beyond that. What I really want to get at here is that this is the kind of approach to tools, thoughtfully architected, sustained as sort of one of your business operations, can really have an incredible impact on how people feel about being together in a set of relations in your organization. The other thing that I think someone mentioned this, often leaders do not actually employ the tools that they have access to work together either as peers or as a senior manager with their direct reports. There's lots of things. I've just threw up some ideas here of how it can be employed, how I've seen leaders use this tool. As important is you've asked your workforce to work collaboratively, socially, digitally. You must do it yourself. And here's why. As if you already have that experience, you know viscerally the power of all of that. If you're a leader that doesn't engage that way, you're only speaking to it, but not speaking from the experience and the feel of that. If you're a leader, you have to show up digitally. What I mean by this is you may have, and this is not tool specific at all, but most of these environments now have the capability for you to express your network leadership, show who your connections are, share some of your recent activities. You want your people to do that. A very senior executive at a company that I had occasion to work with was a master at this, in that he published he was involved in a couple of communities of interest, a biking and workout community. He would post pictures of himself with people around campus. He went to conferences and would blog about it very authentically. And he really, I think most powerfully, he also expressed on his sort of personal profile space his key management theory, if you will, and the top of the list was people development. Imagine the impact that has if you are in the organization at any point in the company and you read that from the voice of the leader himself. Now I want to take a couple of minutes, because I don't have a lot of time, but there's a couple of places that I think people don't understand that could be very powerful tools of engagement, bringing people together to generate new ideas, and also using, for instance, communities for broad-scale change and transformation. I'm not going to go through this flow chart, but essentially you can do strategic crowdsourcing within an enterprise with a very specific kind of process where you target a constituency in your company. You invite them to participate in a very specific way, either ideas or questions, and you get the material and the input from that group, but then it's peer ranked. So anybody that participates gets a voice in supporting the content or the ideas. In some cases, there might be final executive vetting or decision on the overall results, but not during the peer ranking process. So this is a very specific example where a C-suite leadership team every year, all of the leaders in the company got together for 3 or 4 days at the beginning of the fiscal year to sort of move the agenda forward for the company. Part of that event was an executive panel where the 3,500 leaders could hear executives respond to questions. That's a lot of people, and you might, in a live audience, you might get a lot of random questions. So what they did was a crowdsourced, invited people to submit questions. They said, we'll pick the top 4 ranked questions to respond to at the live event. So they had, I don't know, they had a period of maybe a week or 10 days where all 3,500 leaders in the company submitted questions or evaluated questions that had been submitted. They've got 70 questions, 4,000 votes. The way they did that is you could vote, every person had 50 votes. You could vote up to 3 votes on each question, so if you really wanted to help move a question forward. The thing is, they got a lot of questions, and they responded live to the top 4. They got a broad pulse from all of the questions of what were on people's mind. And along with that, they got a lot of constructive comments and sort of ancillary material so that it gave the executives and all the peers a sense of what was happening at the leadership level across the whole company. You can use the same kind of approach. In this case, they had some specific business areas in this company. They were looking to expand their solutions environment, but they had also restructured recently when they did this. And so several VPs invited 500 senior leaders to suggest specific new solution ideas. And though they've got a fair bit of submissions, the top 2 ranked solution sets were then recognized by senior leadership, and those who made that were invited to expand on their proposal, and if they were accepted, they got resourced for the solution. So even though only 2 of the top ranked were invited for further exploration, what you also got was an idea bank, because maybe some of those ideas, it wasn't just the right time, but so there's lots of good sort of collective intelligence gathering in this kind of modality. So what makes it workable and productive? You don't just say, hey, anybody got an idea? No, it's a very carefully designed and facilitated social process. And it makes it very workable when your business purpose is clear, the rules of the game are clear, who's voting, what can they vote on, who's going to get, the ranking, who's going to get voted highest by their peers. For participants, it's like, I'm being asked to contribute. That's really important. And I'm also more visible to my peers across the company and to the executives who invited that participation. One of the last examples is, we've talked a lot about communities, but I've seen communities now being used for large-scale, significant change in companies. In this particular example, it had to do with how do you build data science as a discipline across an organization, across a large company. Data scientists, as someone said to me, are rarer than purple unicorns and twice as expensive. So there's a lot of people that have the background, but they need some additional credentialing and education. This is a community program that wasn't just designed to train and credential people, but to use their knowledge directly to, as part of their education graduation process, to actually work on an executive sponsored business problem that could benefit from data science. So you had an executive enlistment, tell us what your business problem is in supply chain. We'll get a group of 4 or 5 of these in this cohort to work on your business problem, propose a solution, and then we will build a library of applied projects. Every year we have another 100, 200 people in this cohort. Our project library grows. Any executive can wander through this library of applied projects to understand, how can I use data science in my line of business? So it's a very robust model, but I think what's really important is when you have this kind of change, agile, artificial intelligence, data science, you need to you can use this kind of model effectively to drive not only the expertise, the domain expertise, to sustain it, that expertise, but to drive it into to a management understanding and bring people to the table. This wasn't my, I'm going to do this one real quick. I hope I have time. Thank you. This is the only one that's sort of from external documentation. All the others were things that I have seen, observed, written about, or participated in. Bradley and McDonald wrote a book in 2011 called The Social Organization. And this was a very neat example of community collaboration. Cemex is a global cement manufacturer. They also grew rapidly through acquisition. They were trying to drive the use of alternate fuels in their plants. So they designed a process where they brought all 500 engineers and plant managers together in a community experience, invited them to contribute their ideas and their processes just for review and comment. That was an initial cycle to get everybody oriented and engaged, and then they had a second cycle where they began to filter through all this information that they had compiled together, commented on it, clarified, and then came up with some new practices. Then they drove that really into a third cycle where they're doing continual refinement and knowledge sharing, and that becomes almost a continuing community of practice. The key thing about this was normally this kind of thing would have taken almost 2 years to do in a company this big, and they got through the second cycle into the third in 6 weeks. So that's the power of the transparency, bringing people together, not having sort of waterfall requests for information, but having everybody dive into the pool. So if you are an organizational leader, or you report to one, or aspire to be one, I think it's really important to not only understand these models, but enlist them in your initiatives or transformational change processes. This is a test and learn kind of thing. You don't want to start off maybe with some of these examples like data science across your company, but you can begin to see how your culture responds, and you can learn from it. It's also really important to understand that a community structure requires certain kinds of observational results thinking than you're typically used to. It's important to understand these are all facilitated processes, and you have to understand community management and the vital role that facilitation and stewardship plays in these productive processes. I also see that if you're a senior enough leader, it's important to bring your communications and business operations staff along with you, because they do a lot of legwork, and they need to understand the power of some of these capabilities and processes and approaches. It's also really important, as you're leading digitally and socially, that you think about new ways of understanding the value people bring and the impact they bring. So a little bit of new thinking in understanding, if you're employing these communities of practice and these models, who are really the influencers, who has the kind of reputation online, who is really, I never hear that guy speak in a meeting, but I looked at what he's done on that community of practice, and it's phenomenal, right? So you can really spot interesting qualities in your teams. So if you're a leader, no matter whether you're really an organizational leader or what, or just want to express leadership with these tools, it's really learning and incorporating kind of in your everyday natural kit bag, navigate and cultivate networks, and don't just observe but participate in social learning opportunities. For example, the data science example, these were executives that were really taking a look at what was going on in that community. Think about ways to recognize and bring forward network leaders, not just organizational leaders. And I want to thank Daniela over there for this last one. I had a wonderful conversation with her last night about reverse mentoring. So if you are struggling as a leader or know a leader who is struggling, think about how you could help bring some of these ideas and processes and approaches to them. Hey, thanks.